Recently, many people have been asking for videos about Game 0, Game 5, and Game 9. Since Game 9 has already wrapped up, I figured I'd start with that one. Game 9 at the Manor had a pretty interesting lineup: Murro Morton, Naib Subedar, William Ellis, and Kurt Frank. However, before the game even began, Murro was eliminated, and his spot was taken by the magician, Servais Le Roy. And yet, the drama didn't wait for the game to start. There were plenty of intrigues beforehand. What kind of intrigues, you ask? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. This is your broadcaster Silmina, signing in. Let's get started. Let's start the story by deducing the theme of Game 9. In this game, two factions holds a secret or needs to maintain their disguise. Think of it like a game of cat and mouse trying to eliminate each other. This common trait can be seen unveiled when we look deeper into each character backstory, or the reason why they want to go to the Manor and join the Manor game. Let's start with the first character, Naib Subedar, the mercenary. Before diving into his backstory though, it's helpful to talk about the game's time setting, as it really adds context to understanding him. The story of Identity V is set during the Victorian era, which spanned from 1837 to 1901. This was when the British Empire was at its peak, controlling colonies all over the world. That's also why English became a major international language, even ahead of Spanish and Chinese. One of Britain's largest colonies was India, which was then known as the British Raj. Meanwhile, Nepal, where Naib is from, wasn't part of the British Raj. However, Nepal had a friendly relationship with the British and even supported them militarily. This is important because I believe Naib served in the Nepalese army. Even so, his backstory tells that he served in the East India Company, which is confusing on its own part, because the East India Company was dissolved in 1874, while Naib was 27 at the time of his game, which is 1899. This would suggest that Naib was born between 1871 or 1872, and thus, I dropped the possibility of Naib worked for the East India Company. More likely, he worked for the Nepalese army. And since Nepal didn't have its own military campaigns in the 1880s, Naib was likely deployed as part of British forces, most probably through the British Raj, given how close the Kingdom of Nepal and the Kingdom of British at that time. Now, about Naib himself. He was born into a poor family in Nepal. His early life was tough, struggling even to find enough food. His father died when Naib was young, and when he became an adult, he joined the Nepalese army. He hoped the job would help him provide for his family. From the game's deduction quests, we can see Naib was an exceptional soldier. He cared deeply for his family and his comrades. But years of fighting on the front lines left him scarred, physically and emotionally. He started questioning what life beyond war might look like, especially after seeing his brother-in-arms leave the military, while he remained stuck in endless combat. Over time, he realized there was no real escape from warfare. Even soldiers who recovered from injuries were sent back to fight. He also noticed the British soldiers were paid far better than the Gurkhas, despite the Gurkhas facing equal or even greater dangers on the front lines. This disparity likely added to his stress and frustration with military life. Naib's breaking point came when an officer ordered him to confront his own kind. He refused, and after much thought, decided to leave the army entirely, carrying the emotional scars of his experiences. After leaving, Naib became a mercenary, or a soldier for hire. He was later employed by an investigator named Arthur Russell, despite already suffering from PTSD, to locate someone named Murro Morton. This search eventually led Naib to the infamous Ellis Manor, tying his story to the events of the game. Murro Morton is the only survivor of Game 8, who, most likely, deployed again to participate in another game. If you want to know more about him, you can check my previous video about Game 8, which you can find in the IDV lore playlist. At some point, however, Murro was eliminated, and Servais Le Roy come to the manor to find him, as well as replacing him. Kurt Frank is an explorer who's never actually explored. A bit confusing, right? Let me break it down for you. Kurt grew up in a family that traveled constantly. While we don't know much about his parents, their lifestyle suggests they had money, since they could afford frequent trips and even sent Kurt to college. But despite his privileged upbringing, Kurt's life wasn't happy. All the traveling left him lonely and without many friends. Moving around so much made it hard for him to connect with people, and over time, he became alienated from society. Feeling isolated, Kurt turned to books for comfort. He loved losing himself in stories, often imagining himself as the hero. His favorite book was Gulliver's Travels, and he especially loved the idea of shrinking down like Gulliver. These fantasies became his way of escaping reality. When Kurt went to college, things didn't get better. He struggled to fit in and couldn't cope with the demands of college life, partly because he spent too much time dreaming of being a great adventurer like the characters in his books. In reality, he couldn't live up to those fantasies, and the disconnect hit him hard. To make matters worse, Kurt's bushy mustache made him a target for ridicule, which only deepened his sense of alienation. Feeling rejected and out of place, he turned to gambling, particularly betting on horse races, to escape. But his gambling habit left him broke and in debt, and eventually, he dropped out of college. His parents, hoping to straighten him out, sent him to the army. At first, Kurt was admired by his fellow soldiers because he spun tales of grand adventures, which actually are stories he'd read but claimed as his own. They believed him and were impressed. But when it came time for real combat, Kurt's cowardice showed, and his comrades quickly lost respect for him. By now, it was clear that Kurt avoided facing reality. His constant traveling as a child left him afraid to form connections, likely because he didn't want the pain of leaving people behind. In college, people's disdain for him only pushed him further into escapism. And in the army, when his lies were exposed, he retreated even deeper into his delusions. After his military service, Kurt was admitted to White Sand Street Asylum. His mental health had deteriorated significantly, and he likely suffered from schizophrenia. To support this idea, initially Kurt didn't see the asylum as a place of confinement. He thought of it as an exciting new adventure. He described it as a foreign kingdom surrounded by walls, with a grand 52-inch gate. For Kurt, entering the asylum was an act of bravery, as he believed he was defying society's prejudices against such places. But his enthusiasm didn't last. Over time, he came to see the asylum as a prison. Eventually, the head of the asylum, Father Duke, decided to release him, despite objections from Sister Lorraine, one of the staff members. She believed that while Kurt wasn't violent, his delusions could make him manipulative. Still, Kurt was set free. What happened after he was released from the asylum is unclear, but his third letter mentioned him as a person who always tries to get attention from others, which might tie to his childhood experience of loneliness. His fourth letter suggests that Kurt wrote a book and sent it to a publisher called Blackett, which is possibly referencing the real Blackett publishing house. Meanwhile, the wiki said that he was eager to start a real adventure, but was broke and still in debt. Then, one day, he received a letter from Ellis Manor, offering him exactly what he needed. Before diving into William Ellis's backstory, let's talk about two key historical points that connect to his lore: the legend of how rugby football was invented, and the man often credited with it, William Webb Ellis. First is about the legend of rugby football. William Webb Ellis, the inspiration for William Ellis in this game, was an English clergyman believed to have invented rugby football. The sport's name comes from Rugby, a town in Warwickshire, England, where William Webb Ellis grew up. According to the story, in 1823, during a game of big-side football, young William Webb Ellis did something bold. At the time, the rules required players who caught the ball to step back before either punting or placing it for a teammate to kick. Goals were typically scored with these placed kicks. But Ellis? He ignored the rules entirely. Instead of stepping back, he grabbed the ball and ran forward toward the opposing team's goal. This defiance of the rules laid the foundation for rugby as we know it today. While the exact details are fuzzy, his daring move sparked a shift in the sport's style, and eventually, the idea of running forward with the ball became a key feature of rugby football. Now, let's return to William Ellis's story in Identity 5. From the deduction quests, we know he joined an American football team. However, his style of play was too aggressive. If we look into his deduction quest and his first letter, we knew that William exploited the rule of the football games. Connecting with the real William Webb Ellis, we can deduct that William of Identity 5 had a habit of charging forward with the ball, which wasn't allowed under the rules of American football at the time. This led to problems later on, as his reckless play style caused injuries, including one to a teammate, as mentioned in his 8th deduction quest. The incident, and perhaps all of his antics, led him to be kicked off the team. Heartbroken, William attended a magic show, where he noticed a magician tinkering with a chain. This is an important detail we'll revisit later as it ties into the events at Ellis Manor. Sometime later, a new form of football called rugby football began gaining popularity. Unlike American football, rugby allowed players to run forward with the ball, which is exactly what William had been doing all along. Yet, despite his natural fit for the sport, William didn't receive any recognition for his contribution. Instead, he was remembered only as the reckless player who broke the rules in his old football club. With no support or recognition, William ended up joining a small rugby club. While it kept him on the field, it wasn't the life he wanted. According to his 5th letter, William yearned for the thrill of being in the spotlight. Eventually, William received a letter from the mysterious Ellis Manor. The letter acknowledged how he had been mistreated for defying the rules and praised his brilliance for exploiting loopholes in the game. The manor owner invited him for that very reason, to use his talent for bending rules and refining strategies. The magician Servais Le Roy in Identity 5 is inspired by the historical figure of the same name, but their fates are very different. Servais's story has a mysterious, almost blurry quality at certain points, which makes it all the more intriguing. From a young age, Servais was captivated by the world of magic. He attended countless shows with his parents and even snuck backstage to inspect the props and tricks, curious about how the illusions worked. However, magic has its rules, and revealing tricks to the audience was a big no-no. Servais's backstage intrusions often ended with the staff chasing him away. One day, however, he encountered a white-haired magician named John Henry Anderson, another figure based on a real-life historical magician. Unlike the others, John saw potential in Servais and decided to take him on as his apprentice. Under John's mentorship, Servais learned that magic wasn't as mysterious as it appeared. Every illusion had its method, and every trick has its mechanics. This revelation left him disillusioned, as he thought magic was real, not a mere illusion. The enchantment he once felt for magic dimmed, especially as he spent years working as John's assistant. Even so, John believed in Servais's potential, insisting that he would become a great magician someday. Eventually, Servais earned his own stage, as mentioned in his 6th deduction quest. Yet, despite his achievements, he wasn't satisfied. Servais longed for something greater, something that went beyond mere tricks and illusions. The turning point in Servais's life came on a fateful day when he was preparing equipment backstage. A young William Ellis, curious and impulsive, snuck into the area, distracting Servais. In chasing William away, Servais neglected to properly check the props. During John's performance, a malfunction in the equipment led to a horrific accident, resulting in John's death. This is where the opinion about his lore differ among fans, as this incident has 2 major interpretations, each with its own evidence, and thus, I'll let you interpret the incident by yourself. The first one is the negligence theory. According to this theory, Servais's failure to check the props, caused by his distraction while chasing William, was an unfortunate oversight. This version portrays the tragedy as an accident rather than a deliberate act. Supporters of this theory argue that there's no concrete evidence of foul play, and William's belief that Servais killed his mentor might simply be his own misinterpretation of the events. Another one is the jealousy theory. This theory suggests that Servais intentionally sabotaged the equipment out of envy toward John. In this version, William stumbled upon Servais tampering with the props, and Servais chased him away to cover his tracks. This theory is supported by hints in Servais's deduction quests and letters, which describe his dissatisfaction with his achievements and subtle suggestions of darker motives. Regardless of the truth, the tragedy was devastating. On stage, as John's life slipped away, Servais used his magical skills to vanish both himself and John's body, leaving the audience in awe, unaware of the grim reality. The crowd applauded, believing it to be part of the act. After John's death, Servais was hailed as his successor, gaining widespread fame. Yet, even with his growing reputation, he remained unfulfilled. He embarked on a world tour, hoping that greater success might bring him satisfaction. But his ultimate dream was something far beyond fame. He wanted to create real magic, not just illusions. Eventually, Servais received an invitation to Ellis Manor. The letter acknowledged his dissatisfaction and hinted at opportunities to realize his dreams of true magic. Alternatively, the letter could be interpreted as blackmail, forcing Servais to join the manor under threat of exposing the truth about his mentor's death. Whatever the case, Servais accepted the invitation, setting the stage for his next mysterious chapter. There is much to tell about Burke and Bane, but for this Game 9, all we need to know is that Bane is the designated hunter, while Burke assisted Bane when William goes missing during the game. The Game 9 was supposed to start at December 19th, year unknown, but is presumably 1899. There are 4 supposed participants in the game: Murro Morton, Kurt Frank, William Ellis, and Naib Subedar, though the circumstance is kinda odd for Naib Subedar, as he joined the game without any invitation at all. His sole purpose in the manor is to locate Murro Morton and kill him, though it is unclear as to why Naib killed Murro. We all knew that Arthur Russell employed him to locate Murro, but yet there is nothing mentioned about killing him. Also, if Arthur was employed by Mike Morton to locate the Hullabaloo survivors, wouldn't it be more convenience for him if Murro is alive, since he can interrogate him or whatever? A somewhat dim theory, however, suggests that since Mike declared Murro as died in Murro's first letter, then perhaps Arthur wants Naib to check the validity of the info. Still, in the end, the reason why Murro is killed remains a mystery. Before December 4th, Naib completed his mission by killing Murro and his boar. He buried their bodies in the backyard of the mansion. However, the burial site soon attracted other boars, likely drawn by the scent of the remains. To avoid suspicion, Naib distracted the boars and reopened the grave. He hid Murro's body inside the boar's corpse, then put them in the garden for a while. Afterward, he went to fill in the original grave to erase any signs of disturbance. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Kurt introduced himself to William. Their conversation was awkward, with Kurt expressing his frustration that everyone seemed to be keeping to themselves. He suggested they should all gather and share stories, but William reminded him of the rules prohibiting them from going outside. Kurt insisted they could at least meet in a room together and tell stories before leaving to search for Murro. Kurt went to Murro's room but found it locked. He then ventured outside, where he discovered footprints leading to a freshly dug hole. This alerted Naib, who quickly hid behind a tree. Moments later, Kurt encountered a mysterious figure, Bane Perez, also known as the Deer Man. Despite the eerie presence, Bane didn't act that night. After the coast is clear, Naib went in with his work. He filled the grave back again and put the boar in the kitchen, near the stove. The next day began with William wandering through the dining hall, grumbling about when the game would start. While there, he noticed that the statue of a figure holding a lyre in the room was missing 2 strings. He continued to explore the kitchen and found 2 unusual threads in the bin. Using them, he repaired the statue, which caused a hidden drawer beneath it to unlock. Before William could investigate further, Naib interrupted, announcing that Murro was missing and taking Murro's diary with him. Both rushed to Murro's room. After inspecting the window, Naib claimed that Murro had escaped through it. Their conversation was cut short when Servais Le Roy entered the room.
What are you doing? Well, where is that man? Well, speak up. I don't know.
He escaped through that window.
It's freezing outside. How could he survive?
Yes, I agree.
Unknown to William and Naib, Servais had been invited to the manor by its owner to find Murro. Servais investigated the room on his own and discovered that the window was sealed shut, making escape through it impossible. While inspecting the area, Kurt entered and greeted him. After a brief, pleasant conversation about Naib and William, Kurt excused himself, mentioning it had been a while since he'd had a decent chat. Returning to his investigation in Murro's room, Servais pried the door to the bathroom and initially found it empty, but upon further inspection, he discovered an apple stuck on a twig inside. The next day, Servais met Kurt in the dining hall and asked about the twig and apple he had found in Murro's room. Kurt, speaking in his usual poetic manner, explained that the items belonged to Murro. Murro had used the apple, attached to the twig, to feed the boars in the forest outside the manor. After their brief conversation, Kurt headed to the garden while Servais decided to investigate the forest. Taking the apple and twig with him, Servais confirmed Kurt's story when he spotted the boars. However, when he tried to get closer, the boars became aggressive and charged at him. Startled, Servais threw the twig and apple to distract them and hurried back inside, narrowly escaping. He went straight to the kitchen to calm himself with a drink. Meanwhile, in the garden, Kurt encountered William. Kurt poetically remarked on how Servais kept prying about Murro's whereabouts. He also expressed his dislike for Servais, accusing him of having a bad attitude and speaking ill of both Kurt and William. William agreed that Servais was odd, but reminded himself that he had more pressing matters to handle. He then left the garden. When Servais arrived in the kitchen, he found Naib inspecting a dead boar. As Servais approached, Naib curtly told him to leave. Without explanation, Naib began dragging the boar out of the kitchen. This behavior made Servais suspicious. He confronted Naib outside the kitchen, questioning what he was doing with the boar.
Hey there, what are you up to now?
Putting it out of the house. It's too warm inside.
Why didn't you leave it outside in the first place? Suspicious.
Unbeknownst to them, William, on his way back from the garden, overheard their conversation and quietly observed the entire scene. After placing the boar outside, Naib headed to the hallway, likely to hide Murro's diary in a safer location. Servais waited for Naib to leave the area before sneaking into the hallway to investigate. He checked the 2 drawers there, finding nothing in the first and discovering the second drawer was locked. With no further clues, Servais left to confront Naib. Oblivious to him, Kurt had just stepped out of his room and observed Servais's actions from the 2nd floor. After Servais departed, Kurt decided to inspect the drawers himself. Easily prying open the lock on the 2nd drawer, Kurt found Murro's diary. The diary detailed Murro's anguish as the sole survivor of Game 8, but the remaining pages appeared blank. Noticing traces of invisible ink that was made with apple juice, Kurt took the diary to the kitchen. Using the heat from the kitchen fire, Kurt revealed the invisible entries. They described Murro's growing fear, knowing that Arthur Russell, the person who hired Naib, had discovered his location. The final entry hinted at Murro attempting to flee the manor, a conclusion Kurt readily accepted. Meanwhile, William went outside to examine the boar, unaware of the unfolding events inside. Soon after, Naib stepped outside, with Servais following closely behind. Seeing this, William quickly hid and eavesdropped on their conversation. Servais directly accused Naib of murdering Murro, referring to Murro as the uncivilized guy. However, William, overhearing the conversation, misinterpreted the insult as being directed at him. Naib firmly denied the accusations, but the confrontation quickly escalated into a heated argument.
Hey! I don't really like people standing behind me.
Did you make him disappear?
What?
The uncivilized man. You know who I mean.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Room 2, 1st floor. It was you.
Hey, look what I found! Come on!
Kurt gathered Servais and Naib, proposing they play a game before he revealed the secret he had discovered. Servais, dismissing the game as a waste of time, insisted on focusing on Murro's disappearance, even accusing someone in the manner of being involved. Kurt found Servais's attitude rude and chose to play the game with Naib instead. When Naib won, Kurt unveiled the secret, Murro's diary, now fully legible, with the invisible ink revealed. Feigning ignorance, Naib questioned Kurt about the diary, trying to gauge whether Kurt knew anything about Murro's disappearance. However, Kurt seemed unaware of Naib's actions. He mentioned reading the entire diary, including the revealed invisible entries, but admitted many details were still unclear. Kurt even suggested that Servais might have been the one hiding the diary, showing no suspicion toward Naib. After sharing his findings, Kurt returned to his room. Naib, now doubting Kurt's innocence, resolved to investigate further that night. When night fell, Naib began his investigation, but encountered Servais in the hallway. The two quickly got into another heated argument. Servais openly accused Naib of murdering Murro, but Naib adamantly denied it. Before leaving, Servais cryptically remarked that everyone in the manor had their own mission. This left Naib puzzled, wondering what Servais could mean. In the dining room, William found a card indicating that Servais would not be placed in Murro's former room. Curious, William checked Murro's room, noting that snow had now covered the previous footprints outside the window. During his search, he discovered a golden ball under the bed. Remembering that the ball belonged to the frog statue in the garden, William went outside and placed it back on the statue. This action caused the frog's mouth to open, revealing a note with 2 pieces of information. The game would start on December 19th, and a new riddle to solve. William solved the riddle by examining all the clocks in the manor, which led him to crack a code. He input the code into the statue of a figure holding a lyre, unlocking a drawer underneath. Inside, he found another cryptic note stating, "Diary is a human-made record, and curiosity kills the cat." Though puzzled by its meaning, William decided to keep the note, sensing its importance. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Servais encountered Kurt, who casually mentioned how troublesome the wild boars were. Servais then went to the dining room, where he found a note with his room number and a muse symbol. Soon after, he ventured outside to the forest and noticed the wild boars gathered around the dead boar. Strangely, unlike their earlier aggressive behavior, the boars fled when Servais approached. Servais inspected the dead boar, suspecting there was something hidden inside it. However, before he could investigate further, Naib arrived and rudely ordered him to leave.
Supposed to be empty. There's still something inside.
Stop it. That is mine.
Why so nervous?
Cut the crap.
Just having a look.
Right, with your feet.
It's only a dead pig.
Don't let me catch you doing that again.
Frustrated, Servais returned to the dining room for a drink. Before he could take a sip, Naib confronted him again, warning him not to meddle with others' property and claiming the boar as his own. Naib suggested that if Servais wanted a boar, he should capture one himself, then left abruptly. Irritated by the exchange, Servais angrily threw tableware to the floor. Startled by a rat scurrying through the mess, he tried to stomp on it but failed, only increasing his frustration. Moments later, he noticed a small bottle lying on the floor, which turned out to be a poison. Servais grew increasingly frustrated with the stagnant state of his investigation. He believed he had pieced together the clues about Murro's whereabouts, but Naib Subedar persistently obstructed him from reaching the final revelation. Reflecting on his time in the manor, Servais recalled finding colored juggling balls in the laundry room. This reminded him of a report about the tragedy at the Hullabaloo Circus, specifically the mysterious disappearance of the animal tamer, as well as the strange performances involving wild boars and wild children, which we knew was Murro. By connecting these clues, Servais concluded that all the surviving members of the circus, including Murro, had been in the manor at some point. However, their ultimate fates remained a mystery. Servais also remarked on the manor's decrepit state and resolved to leave as soon as he completed his mission. His plan was to take all the evidence he could gather about the previous participants of the manor's deadly game with him. Naib, still troubled by Servais' cryptic remarks during their argument on December 7th, decided to investigate the manor. He searched the hallway, dining room, and a narrow corridor leading to the forest, ultimately ending his search at the dead boar where he had hidden Murro's corpse. Along the way, he discovered several unusual items: Emily's aid kit, Michiko's mask, and evidence that others had been in the manor before him. These discoveries deeply unsettled Naib. He began to suspect that the manor owner had deliberately lured various individuals to the estate, and that the game was a sinister trap designed to imprison its participants. Despite his suspicions, Naib couldn't yet determine the owner's motives or the fates of previous players. Determined to uncover the truth, Naib continued his investigation into the night of December 9, questioning the other participants. Their answers varied. Servais remarked that the only peculiar thing was his roommates, including the dead boar Naib had been guarding so closely. Kurt mentioned the frog sculpture and hinted at knowing more, but only if Naib agreed to meet him in the garden. The most significant breakthrough came from William, who showed Naib a card he had found in a secret drawer. The card contained cryptic messages: "Curiosity kills the cat," and "Diary is a human-made record." Piecing together the clues and what he already knew, Naib reached a grim conclusion. The manor's game was a deadly cycle, forcing participants to play until their inevitable demise. Kurt, hoping to meet Naib as planned, left his room and headed to the garden. Along the way, he encountered William. William mentioned the frog statue in the garden and its strange storage mechanism, sparking Kurt's interest. Believing the statue might hold clues to Murro's disappearance, Kurt suggested they go to the garden together. Once in the garden, William explained how the golden ball functioned as a switch to open a compartment in the frog's mouth. After sharing this, William left Kurt alone to continue his investigation. Meanwhile, Servais devised a new plan to inspect the boar carcass guarded by Naib. He approached William near the door to the garden, casually bringing up the idea of cooking a delicious boar leg. Intrigued, William remembered the wild boar Naib had left outside and mentioned being inspired by Servais' suggestion, adding that he might pair the dish with some wine from the kitchen. Servais once again attempted to inspect the boar, but found Naib vigilantly guarding it, leaving no opportunity for him to get close. Frustrated, Servais retreated to the kitchen, with Naib following closely behind, further fueling his irritation. Once in the kitchen, Servais poured himself a glass of wine, only to be distracted by a rat scurrying nearby. Angry and determined, he decided to poison the rat using a vial of poison he had found earlier. After pouring the poison into a glass of wine, he realized he needed to safely dispose of the bottle and hid it in a drawer in the hallway. Meanwhile, William, inspired by Servais' suggestion, went to inspect the boar in the forest. As he examined it, Naib appeared, confronting him. William explained he simply wanted to cook part of the boar, since it had been left untouched for so long. Realizing William was unaware of the true significance of the boar, Naib told him to return to the kitchen. Instead, William stopped by the laundry room to grab matches. On his way back, he saw Naib and Servais pass each other, both glaring in open disdain. This surprised William, who had assumed the two were friendly. Back in the kitchen, Naib had prepared a boar leg for William but warned him against eating it, pointing out its unappetizing appearance. Despite the warning, Naib suggested adding spices or wine if William insisted on eating it. After Naib left, William found a glass of wine, which is the one Servais had poisoned, and used it to cook the boar leg. Servais, seizing the opportunity after crossing paths with Naib, inspected the boar again. He noted that the carcass had frozen solid and decided he would need sharp tools to examine it further. Returning to the kitchen, he found William cooking the boar leg. William thanked Servais for the idea and invited him to wait in the dining hall while he prepared the meal. Unbeknownst to William, Servais had no intention of eating the dish, knowing it was poisoned. Why Servais withheld this information remained unclear, though it was likely to avoid exposing his involvement with the poison. Kurt was waiting in the garden for Naib when he came across Wu Chang's parasol and a belladonna plant. Before long, Naib rushed in, panicked, and told Kurt that William had been poisoned. The two hurried to the dining hall, where they found William unconscious, with Servais standing nearby. Kurt shouted at Servais to fetch some saline water.
Get him some saline water. Make him spit out the poison. Hurry up! I'm on it.
Thanks to Kurt's quick thinking, William's life was saved. He woke up the next morning with Kurt by his side, taking care of him. Kurt offered to tell him a story, but William interrupted, saying he knew who poisoned him, Servais Le Roy. William explained that, years ago, he witnessed Servais kill his magician mentor by tampering with the equipment used for a performance. He suspected Servais wanted to poison him now because he was a witness to that crime. When Kurt asked why William hadn't told Naib, William said he believed Naib and Servais were close companions. This misunderstanding came from William thinking Servais's earlier insult, calling someone barbaric, was aimed at him, though it was actually about Murro. Kurt reassured William he was intelligent, then left the room. Later, Kurt confronted Servais in the main hallway, accusing him of trying to kill William and bringing up the murder of Servais's mentor. Servais fiercely denied the accusations, and their argument escalated until Naib arrived and broke it up. Kurt and Naib then went to the garden, where Kurt thanked Naib for stepping in earlier. As a gesture of gratitude, Kurt began telling Naib a story about his experiences in the manor. The diary ends here, leaving Kurt's fate unclear. However, his letters give hints about what may have happened. Kurt told Naib a fantasy story inspired by his time in the manor. While Kurt intended it as fiction, Naib, being paranoid and suspicious, interpreted the story as a veiled confession or an attempt to expose his crimes. Fearing exposure, Naib killed Kurt to cover his tracks. The day started with William panicking in the main hallway. It's implied that he somehow killed Servais and was spiraling into a state of panic. Naib, being the mercenary he is, told William to calm down and dragged Servais's body, wrapped in cloth, out of sight. William, still shaken, wandered off to compose himself. Naib carried the body through the dining hall toward the forest. But before he could leave the manor, his worst fear became reality. He encountered the deer man, Bane. Forced to act quickly, Naib hid Servais' body and took cover in Murro's room until Bane left. Once the coast was clear, Naib resumed his attempt to dispose of the body in the forest. He realized that William is still inside and went back. However, Bane caught up to him and captured him, possibly knocking him unconscious in the process. From this point, the events are pieced together from letters and notes, as the character diaries end here. Here's what we know though. Naib and William were captured. Both had broken numerous rules, and as punishment, they were sentenced to execution. Game 9 was then cancelled due to a lack of participants. To cover their tracks, the manor owner sent a fake telegram to Arthur Russell, claiming Naib's mission was a success and cutting off any further contact between them. 3 days later, Naib managed to escape captivity, leaving behind a note stating he refused to obey the manor's absurd rules. This prompted the manor owner to deploy their head of security, Burke Lapidura, to hunt Naib down, as he was believed to still be somewhere in the manor. What happened to Naib after this is unclear, with two main theories emerging. The first theory stated that Naib was recaptured and executed. Supporters of this theory believe Naib was eventually subdued and executed, with William witnessing the event. This aligns with William's fourth letter, which mentions an execution he witnessed, even though it doesn't specify who. They suggest William fled in fear after witnessing Naib's fate, but was later caught and subjected to experiments. The second theory suggests that Naib is still alive. This theory points out that William's letter never explicitly names Naib as the one who was executed. In fact, William's writings indicate he was still searching for Naib's whereabouts when he was recaptured, implying Naib may have escaped and remained at large. Regardless of Naib's fate, Game 9 was abandoned. The manor owner, however, learned a valuable lesson. Their defenses had vulnerabilities. As a result, they began planning Game 10, this time incorporating advanced mechanical systems to prevent further breaches. This is my interpretation of the lore as it stands. If you have any additions or thoughts, feel free to share. This is your broadcaster, Silmina, signing off. Until next time.